Here's what I've seen happen for teams that use this approach. First, they get that planning time back because when everyone understands the plan and their role in it, things go faster and smoother. Your team members are more engaged. They care. They understand the bigger picture. Second, projects finish on time. Revolutionary concept, I know, but when you've identified risks up front and created clear accountability and a roadmap, you prevent a lot of fires before they start. And third, this is my favorite part, people actually enjoy the work more. They feel invested and they see progress against the plan, and they feel a real sense of success when milestones are achieved.
Welcome. You're listening to This Leader, the podcast. If you lead people and are seeking the transformational, high-impact secrets that will lead to greater joy and fulfillment in your work, will optimize your team performance, and will help you create a happy, highly productive workplace, then you are this leader and you're in the right place. I'm your host, Claire Laughlin, and each week my guests and I will explore the mindsets, techniques, and actionable strategies that will help you build the career, team, and organization of your dreams. Because I believe no one should have to suffer in a dysfunctional workplace. Let's get started. Hi there. Welcome back. I have just come back from a super energizing morning. I spent this morning on site with one of my clients, working with about 50 managers to learn and apply principles of project management. It's a lot of fun. In just over 3 hours, these folks formed teams, got into roles, acted as a project team, and drafted a high-level project plan for a very important initiative. There was so much energy in the room. It was absolutely contagious. Flip chart paper, colorful pens, everyone up and talking. And even with those with no prior training in project management, were able to contribute fully to building the key components of a project plan. It was so much fun. But I just have to tell you how all of this came to be. So, who remembers 2008? Yep, that housing bubble that burst in 2008. Remember that? It was crazy. If, like many, you've tried to put the details out of your mind, let me just remind you. In 2008, here's what happened. Unethical lending practices, home lending practices, led to a lot of people getting home loans that they couldn't really afford, especially when rates changed. And then there were many people who defaulted on those loans, which led to some lenders collapsing. You might remember the Lehman Brothers. They were pretty famous. And then that led to job losses, more defaults, the economy coming to a halt. It was a huge, scary, devastating mess. And my community, like so many others, was in big trouble. I was very fortunate at the time to be called to work on a massive countywide response program. So picture this. There was at least a dozen agencies, all trying to help people get re-skilled after the housing bubble burst and people lost their jobs. There were, smart people, motivated people, caring people, all coming together to find solutions to this massively complex problem. And we did what every sort of well-intentioned organization does when facing a big challenge. We looked for some expert advice and we found a consultant named Fred to teach us project management so that we could work faster and more efficiently. And Fred came to our community and stayed for like a week, as I recall. And we had multiple days of training. I think it was like 40 hours of training. We learned charts and methodologies and frameworks, the works. And you know what happened after Fred left? Not much. Basically, we more or less went right back to our old ways of managing the work instead of putting our new skills into action. Why? Because though it was fascinating and I learned a lot, it was just too complicated. There were too many steps, too much jargon. It was too overwhelming for a group of people who already felt like they were drowning in the complexity of what we were trying to do. Does any of this sound familiar?
So today, I want to share with you a completely different approach, one that I've used to help hundreds of leaders actually get project plans done without the overwhelm. And I call it project management for the rest of us. So here's the hidden truth about project management. What nobody tells you is that you're not actually managing projects, you're managing people. You're trying to get people to all focus on the same work and outcomes at the same time so that they can coordinate their actions and get results. And what many people do, though, is they skip the planning in favor of getting straight to work. They feel like we've got so much to do, we don't have time to plan, only to find in a couple of weeks that they're then dealing with emergencies that could have been prevented with just a little forethought. Or, they find themselves hunting down their co collaborators and trying to coerce them into completing tasks. And because that helpful spreadsheet that you created with all those tasks and deadlines, some people are really good at that, and you sent it out with a very friendly email in a wholehearted attempt to save everyone some effort, well, unfortunately, no one really read that email, nor did they take the time to add those tasks to their calendars or to get really connected to the importance of the work. Okay, sorry, I don't mean to get cynical, but it's just that, you know, that's not really project management. It's like task delegation, and there's a huge difference. There's a time and a place for task delegation, and there's a different time and place for really building a great project plan. So, real project management, the kind that really works, it's about getting people invested in the work. It's about understanding what the customers really need, the people who will benefit from your program. And it's about bringing people together to solve problems before they happen. And here's the thing that drives me crazy, and I bet it drives you crazy too. We all know that we should plan before we jump into the work. We know it. My clients tell me this all the time, like, wow, a little bit of planning goes a long way, but we don't do it because we tell ourselves that we don't have time. So let me take you back to that story about Fred, our consultant. About a year after that, I was working with a client who had the exact same kind of problem. Their project management officer, their PMO, she was brilliant, really good at her job, but she couldn't get anyone else in the company to use her methodology. Does that sound familiar? Why? Because as I experienced firsthand in the prior project I told you about, traditional project management is designed for project managers, not for everyday leaders like you and me who need to get cross functional teams moving quickly with minimal extra time and without having to learn new terminology and systems before getting started. The result is that many organizations don't have consistent systems for launching and leading projects. And this means everyone has different ways of doing things and different expectations, and they work on different timelines. So teams work in silos, and there's missed deadlines and scope creep. Sponsors and stakeholders and customers get frustrated with the process and outcomes. And leaders like you and me, we feel like we're failing at something that seems like it should be really straightforward. So ultimately, my friends, here's what I realized. The problem isn't really that we're bad at managing our work. The problem is that we don't have an easy, actionable roadmap that truly engages people. So here's what happened next. I partnered with that brilliant project management officer, and we created something entirely different. Not a 40-hour certification program, but a simple, engaging process that small teams can use to get up and running quickly. And I call it project management for the rest of us. And it's based on one core principle. If you bring the right people together for a simple and right-sized planning process, and you engage people all along the way, the execution becomes exponentially easier. So let me walk you through this using a real-life example. So when you're planning a project, step number one is getting crystal clear on who and why. This is the first mistake most of us make. We jump into what we're going to do before we understand who we're doing it for and why it matters. I'd like to go through an example so you can really see this in action. And I'll use an example of a project that would require some community engagement, just because it's going to show how this process can be very useful, even with something that can feel complex, like engaging the community. So here's how this works in practice. Let's say you're a team working for a city government and you're building a community garden. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. You've got gardeners who want to have a say. You've got neighbors who care about park views and who may or may not want a community garden near them. You've got families who may want educational access to this new garden, and so many other potential groups. But before you start planning site visits or community meetings, you need to have two critical conversations at a minimum. First, a sponsor interview. This is a conversation with whomever is ultimately responsible for the project's success. This is not really the people doing the work, but the person who will be held accountable for the outcome. And you need to ask that person, what does success look like to you? What are you most worried about? Like, how will you know in the end whether this project was worth the investment? Those are some key questions. Second, identify your different customer groups. Customers are the ones who will benefit from the good or service you're providing. And ask, who is this really for and what do they really want? And think about this, because until you understand what your customers actually want, and by the way, interviewing them and talking to them as much as possible is the best course of action. And, not just what you think they want, you can't design a process that's really going to satisfy them. This step alone will provide amazing protection against project failure, because many projects fail or they're severely delayed, not because of poor execution, but because we solved the wrong problem or we satisfied the wrong customer. How many times have you seen that happen? So start there. Step number 2 is defining your boundaries and anticipating your risks. This is where we determine what's in and what's out of scope. Many people tell me that one of the biggest challenges to project success is scope creep. So here's the key. This is about managing expectations. Defining the scope clearly gives you a chance to negotiate the boundaries of any project so it doesn't become overwhelming. So in our example, say you decide to have community meetings about the garden location. When you're thinking about scope, you think about things like this, like, will you serve food to increase participation? I mean, that may be in scope or out of scope. Will you create videos for social media about different potential sites? Will you send printed flyers to all community members, or will you create a radio ad? These kinds of things can help you determine what's in and what's out. Because the more you decide up front, the easier it is to manage expectations of all your different stakeholder groups down the road. And the real magic happens when you do this as a team, because when people participate in defining the boundaries, they take ownership of staying within those boundaries. Then, my friends, there's risk planning. Like, what could possibly go wrong? It's so important to ask this question because people will come up with all kinds of things that you alone may not think about. Like for our community garden example, what if the most vocal community members dominate the conversation? Or what if the preferred site has hidden infrastructure problems? Or what if the timeline gets compressed or materials aren't available? When you identify those risks up front as a team, you're not just planning, you're building your future resilience. Step 3 is mapping your stakeholders. And here's where many leaders get tripped up. We think about the people who need to do the work, but we forget about all the people who can influence the work. I use a simple framework so I don't overlook important stakeholders, because I've done that and it's a pain. And it involves a 2x2 matrix that compares degrees of influence, like high to low, with favorability, high to low, like whether a stakeholder group is in favor of your project or possibly against it. So those high influence supportive stakeholders, those are your champions. Keep them informed, keep them engaged, and deploy them to spread the word. How about those high influence but unsupportive people? Those are your risks, but they can provide important information that can help you succeed. You need a specific plan for understanding them and winning them over, or at least neutralizing their resistance if possible. Even your stakeholders with seemingly less influence are very important. These are people who you've got to consider because they can potentially stall your efforts or they can become your greatest assets. They can be your stealth champions. The key insight here is this: different stakeholders need different information at different frequencies. So understanding their needs is really important. Imagine your weekly team update shouldn't be the same as your monthly sponsor report, right? Or your quarterly community report. So you'll want to create a communication plan to ensure that all your stakeholders are getting the information they need when they need it. All right, let's dive into action planning. I like to call this one swim lanes and sticky notes. This is where we get into the actual work planning, but I like to do it visually and collaboratively, hands on. So instead of someone disappearing into a corner with Microsoft Project and coming out with a task list for everyone, like voila, we roll up our sleeves, grab a bunch of sticky notes, and find some whiteboards or blank walls and flip chart paper. Why? Because when people can see the whole project laid out visually and they participate, then they actually understand how their piece fits into the bigger picture and what it really is going to take to get the work done. In this exercise, I like to help people organize the work into categories, which I call swim lanes. So for the garden project we were talking about, those lanes might be something like this, like site preparation could be a lane, or community engagement could be a lane, regulatory approval or physical installation, those might be some lanes. And then we identify the major deliverables and the milestones within each of those swim lanes. Like, what are we actually going to produce? What are the significant events along the way? We got to identify those first. And then we assign tasks that will help us get to those milestones and deliverables. And finally, and this is crucial, we assign a lead person for each swim lane, not someone to do all the work, but someone to be accountable for coordinating that category. And when people can choose that and opt in on their own, it's particularly manageable because now we have a group of owners, people who really own the work, and that feels good. Finally, step 5 in our short course is a resource reality check. This is the budget conversation, and I don't just mean money. This is a time to discern what this project will actually cost and what it will take in terms of time, money, and political capital. Do we have what we need? And if not, how do we get it? And this is often, my friends, where we discover that our brilliant plan needs some adjusting. And that's okay. It's much better to adjust the plan now than to run out of resources halfway through. So now you might be thinking, oh, Claire, this sounds like a lot of work up front. And you're right. It is a little more work up front than simply jumping in. But this program is designed to be simple and straightforward and to help a team get serious traction in a short period of time. Just this morning, I had 50 people in just a little over 3 hours. But we made some serious progress. People came away with a strong outline of a plan in just a little over 3 hours. Because here's what I've seen happen for teams that use this approach. Well, first, yes, they spend some time up front, but they get that time back. Because when everyone understands the plan and their role in it, things go faster and smoother. Your team members are more engaged. They care. They understand the bigger picture. Second, projects tend to finish on time. Revolutionary concept, I know, but when you've identified those risks up front and you've created clear accountability and a roadmap to guide yourselves, you prevent a lot of fires before they start and you get people connected, right? And third, this is my favorite part, people actually enjoy the work more. They feel invested and they see progress against the plan, and they feel a real sense of satisfaction when milestones are achieved. So let me address what some of you are probably thinking right now. Here's one. Yeah, but Claire, we don't have time for all this planning. And I get it. I really, really do. But let me ask you this. How much time are you spending right now on, status meetings or clarifying confusion or fixing problems that could have been prevented or cajoling and coercing people to come along? The time you invest in collaborative planning, especially with a right size process, like the shortest, fastest way to a plan. And when you do that on the front end, it gets returned to you tenfold during execution. Here's another. Yeah, Claire, but our work is too unpredictable for this kind of structure. And actually, that's exactly when you need this kind of structure most. You adding clarity, because when everything is changing, having that clear fit framework for making decisions becomes your lifeline. How about this? Like, yeah, Claire, but my team, they won't engage in this kind of process. They just won't do it. And hey, if your team won't invest a few hours in planning a project that they'll be working on for months, that tells you something important about engagement and ownership. And that's a leadership conversation worth having. Or they just don't know how and they've never had fun with it. So it might be time for that. So here's your takeaway. Check the show notes for a link to a project launch checklist that I created for you. This isn't just another to-do list, my friends. It's a systematic roadmap that walks you through each element we've discussed today. Like, just look and read through. Start at the top. And can you clearly name your project's primary customer groups? Do you understand their needs? Have you interviewed your sponsor? Can you articulate their success criteria? Those are all parts of the checklist. Work your way down through the checklist. I guarantee you're going to discover gaps you didn't know existed. Most leaders really think they have clarity on the basics, but I mean, I know I do, but when you actually write them down, that's when the real learning happens. And here's what I really want you to consider. Like, how much more powerful would this be if your entire team went through this process together and committed to a shared process for doing this? I mean, I've had clients tell me that our one-day project management for the rest of us workshop was the most productive time their team had spent in months. Because for the first time, everyone was literally on the same page, working from the same assumptions, aligned around the same objectives, and clear about their roles and responsibilities. I remember one director told me, Claire, we've been struggling with this project for 3 months. And in just a few hours, we solved problems that had been paralyzing us. And often, honestly, that is the magic of having a facilitated process and having collaborative planning. So if you're thinking about bringing this kind of training to your organization, here's what I want you to know. This isn't just about project management. This is really about building a culture where teams are able and know how to align quickly, communicate clearly, and deliver results consistently. How great would that be? And when I work with teams, I don't just teach them the process, I facilitate action using a realistic scenario. And they walk away with both the skills and a project plan that they can use as a guide. So if you're ready to stop managing projects and start leading people through transformational work, don't hesitate. Let's talk. Reach out to me. I'd love to explore how we can bring this approach to your team. Remember, you're not managing projects. You're leading people through complex work. And people need to understand not just what they're doing, but why it matters and how their piece fits into the bigger picture. When you create that understanding through collaborative planning, everything else becomes easier. The execution, the problem solving, the communication, all of it flows more smoothly because everyone is aligned around a shared vision of success. So don't let another project start without proper planning, and don't let another fire surprise you when it could have been prevented. Don't do all the thinking yourself when your team is capable of so much more. So that's it for today, my friends. If this episode helped you, please share it with another leader who can benefit. Let's build our community of happy and highly productive leaders. Thanks so much for listening. And until next week, go lead the way. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about my services and for lots of free resources and additional tools to enrich your journey, visit my website and subscribe to my newsletter at clairelaughlin.com. If you have a question about leadership, teams, or organizational culture you'd like me to address on the podcast, please reach out to me at support@clairelaughlin.com and connect with me on social channels @ClaireLaughlin Consulting. Until next time, lead the way.